So I think we are live now. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for making the time for joining us. Building a community isn't just like getting people together. It's so much more than that. And how to do this, I have three amazing guests
live
today.
now. Okay, so welcome.
And this is now, it's like, oops. I hear myself. Okay. And okay, let me introduce you. James Glazebrook. He's the co-founder of the storytelling and community project, We Are Childfree. Then,
Hi.
hi, James. Hi, welcome. Then I have Giselle Jensei. She's our community catalyst and Reiki master from California. And she has built several communities and one very special one that I also had the pleasure to live in for a while, a garden project in Santa Monica. Hi, Giselle. And then there's Tami Zori. She's the founder of Citytree, a communal living experience in Tel Aviv. And thank you very much, Tami, for being here. And so before we dive in, I'd love to take a moment to acknowledge Tami for coming on here, and despite these challenging times right now. And so thank you very much, Tami. And
thank you all for having me. And I want to acknowledge all the people out there and that are either directly suffering or are very confused and speechless, or are doing wonderful acts right now to help the situation. And I just wish for peace on earth, and I hope that this hour will be quiet, and I can't even say if it will be here where I am. So thank you for having me in this situation.
Thank you, Tami. Thank you. I even also stayed in Tel Aviv. I stayed with Tami and I experienced her way of living in community, which was very unique and extraordinary. So that's why I thought she would be the perfect guest. And when we spoke a month ago, like, I don't think we could even fathom anything like this would happen, right?
Yep.
So, and then there's Michael Kastenbaum. He's a community builder of all sorts, and he will just like be my co-host and ask questions as well. Awesome. So as a child-free person, I think we all long for building connection, or we all have like a moment when we ask ourselves, so what is my family? Does family really have to be only blood family? And how do I build a community? And how do you do that? Is like through several ways. And one is like what James and his wife have done and established so far is We Are Childfree, the storytelling project and community project. So maybe James, you want to introduce us to your project and tell us a bit about it.
Sure. Yeah. So it's more my wife's project than mine. Zoe started taking photos of child-free women about 6 years ago in Berlin, Germany, where we used to live. And she started out because she'd just kind of realized herself that she was child-free, just found the language to describe that, and was wondering if anyone out there felt the same. Like, we didn't have anyone in our lives who had like definitely decided not to have children. There were people who were waiting until later in life to make that kind of decision. But Zoe didn't know that there were child-free people out there until she started taking portraits of them. And she met about 20 people that way. And we started sharing those on Instagram, especially. And then when the New York Times picked up the project, that just kind of exposed it to the whole world. And suddenly we had thousands of people on a spreadsheet waiting to share their stories, and lots more eyes on the project. And that's when we kind of realized that, yeah, there's like a whole, there are tons of us out there, right? That we're like 1 in 4 people may not end up having children. But because of the media and because of the way the world is, we're led to believe we're the only ones. So that's kind of what started getting us interested in community. Like, we had people all over the world saying, we need community, we want community, where is it? And then we started focusing our efforts more on finding different ways to share stories, because when people share their stories with us and we share it with the world, folks can identify with that. And even if it's something like the comment threads on our Instagram, that's kind of a space for community, for like validating each other, supporting each other. And then, yeah, about a year ago now, we launched a private member community, so that it's mostly a way for folks to support our project so that we can dedicate more time to telling these stories, and especially getting out there and taking these portraits. And we have about 300 people in that community. They're people who are paying to be in there. They are people who are also sponsoring others to be in there. So there's folks who we allow in for free because of the generous donation of someone else, because we believe everyone should have access to the community they need. And we've just seen lots of like lovely relationships bloom and conversations happen, and lots of advice and experience being shared, especially amongst people who have no one around them who's child-free. Maybe they're in like slightly remote areas. It's just really wonderful for us all to be able to pull together and get on a Zoom conversation and talk in a kind of judgment-free, safe space about the challenges that we face as child-free people.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I've been watching your project and also Zoe's and your work, and it has been done with so much passion and love. And it's really nice to see that. And I think this is like really needed. And so that is like, it's like the best resource, I think, out there for child-free people, including your podcast. So, exactly. So, and we can go later on. I think I would like to talk a little bit about also like how it is to build an online community, and then from going from online also maybe to offline. But so Giselle has also built communities and is a community catalyst. So maybe you want to tell us what drove you, or what inspired you to build communities.
Well, thank you for inviting me here to have this conversation. And just to give you backstory, I'm one of 6 children. I grew up in a very big house, and my home was a hub for the Albanian community in New York that would come through. My parents were always hosting people that were immigrating to America. And so I grew up in a home that had people coming through all the time. So my parents, taught me the ways of community because of how they were generous and how they opened up their home and helped so many people. And so as an adult, when I grew up, I moved out of New York. I moved to Los Angeles, where I did not know anyone. And, didn't end up having a child, although I did want to have a child. It didn't happen. And so in the midst of all that, it was like figuring out, filling that part of me that longed for community, for tribe. And so it just started with, I would meet people. And initially, I think it started with Thanksgiving, where I would have these, Thanksgiving dinners where I would invite everyone that I would meet literally to my home. And it started with that. And then anytime that I met someone, I would always have something to invite them to. And that was just how it started for me. And it wasn't even intentional. It just was very, very instinctual of like my parents, like, come to my home. And so that's basically how it started for me. And this was many, many years ago. I moved to LA in 1995. So I started building community through inviting people into my home, sharing meals. And then that moved into, I've had a lot of different iterations, because I had left LA, moved into a community in Costa Rica. And after coming back from Costa Rica, that's when I started the Giving Garden. So my friend Gidget has a home in Santa Monica, and I had seen her backyard, and she had this, crabgrass and weeds, and I decided to take over the backyard, and I decided to do it with community. So I would invite people to have garden days. And I loved it because I hate pulling weeds, and people would come and pull weeds and be really happy to do that, which was amazing. And afterwards, we'd always have a meal. We'd always like feed everyone. And so people got to meet one another at these garden days. And so the community got built through building the garden, through, coming together. And so it just was building into what it is today. Like I actually had my birthday party there recently, like last week. And it was amazing to go back and to see all the flowers and the plants and the people that were there at the beginning of the start. In 2008, we started the community. And there's that, like, even if people haven't seen each other in a while, there's still that like point of connection, like, oh, we did this together. So that's just a quick summary of, how I went about it. And it was just, again, deep longing for myself to want to have family, to want to have tribe, to want to be connected to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I want to say already, because that is the beginning of the Giving Garden, and it was like a phenomenal project. But then also things then kind of unraveled a little, which I want to get into later on. And that is like the lessons that you then, how community how do you need to actually foster a community? How do you need to lead a community? And I want to get into that a little later. But now Tommy has also a very interesting living community experiment. That's how, like, you tell me how you call it.
I actually, we always have been, and we decided that what we are is a knowledge center. And we are a knowledge center for deep ecology and climate resilience. But it's not like we learn and teach all the time. That's what I love doing. I love learning. And since a certain point, I discovered that's the most amazing thing for me to learn is my own body and my own very, very close environment. So it's like in circles. I took the permaculture course also, and it all connected. It's like all built in circles. So I started to work on my body community when I was 25, and I discovered the whole thing about healthy, like being healthy, being active, about doing things that will actually change my body and make it better. It's like very basic, but I wasn't aware of it at all. And then later, I realized that I can also take care of my home in the same way. So I can create a space that is healthy, a healthy space for my body to be in. And I was always a homey girl. I loved being in my room and making projects, and I wasn't very social, but in a way I was. I always liked to organize things, like organize people. Not out of a specific love for people per se, but just like just seeing that things are not organized, or that people do not meet each other, or people do not connect. And it's like, why? You have to talk with each other, And somehow I always find myself in the middle of a network. I used to live in New York for a few years, and I came as a designer and I became a recruiter. So as a recruiter, it was the same. It was actually kind of a community building, because it was like knowing everybody in Silicon Alley. That was what was then 96, and making the connections. Oh, I think this place is good for you. Take this job, or, and then I found myself writing emails to people and telling them, it was pre-Facebook. I was meeting with all the startups that were looking for people, like the first online video stuff and all that. And everybody was talking about advertising and how the internet is going to make money. And I was like, is this what's really interesting about that? I mean, we have a network here. Let's work with it. Let's meet. Let's make people talk to each other. So I started writing those emails in New York. A friend just reminded me that I did Facebook before Facebook. This is what I'm doing tonight. Maybe you want to come. It's like as if that's the most interesting thing in the world, where I am in the world. And people came. So I kept doing those things. And when I started CityTree, I was interested in the know-how. And I very much related to what Giselle was telling her story. because I think that the connection of people and a garden, okay? People and soil, people and the earth is not only the most natural thing and the most basic thing. It's like taking care of my body, taking care of the earth. It's the next step. Or so working around that, connecting people to each other, but also back home. I think that's very urgent right now. And I'm talking from Israel, and I keep imagining how it will look like if the soil will come back and people will come back to gardening and to growing their own food everywhere they are. And it's very hard in Israel. And I'm a city girl. I love Tel Aviv. Used to love Tel Aviv until it stopped being a place that I can bear. And I created this. I didn't really create a community. This is why I'm always surprised. Oh, I'm a community builder? Really? No, I'm just, I don't know. I like to learn and to talk and to do things with my hands. So I created a space and people just started to come. I really didn't plan to create a community. I created a space that will hold ecological living and show. I made my home and myself very public. I opened my door. The door is always open. There's no key.
That's
And
true. I saw that. Yeah. Yeah.
People can
It's
come.
very
Like,
special
I'm doing an interesting, it's a little bit like in New York. I'm here. I'm doing an interesting thing. Come and see. And people came and I'm always shocked. Oh, really? It's like really interesting. Oh, you really came? So yeah, this is how it started, and then a long story.
A long story.
But it's real life. I lived in the place where the community is. So it's also very basic. I felt like I'm rediscovering the way, just the natural way. Live with people.
What I also found, because you didn't buy I think vegetables, right? You were like always looking where are in the trees, where is like vegetables.
Oh, we bought our vegetables and fruits.
Some of it? Okay.
A lot of the food is coming from the environment. Like one of the things we love is forage in the city. There's a lot of food that people are just disregarding. Also in the shops, you know. We love organic. We're snobs. We like healthy food. So we don't take from the garbage of non-organic places. But there's a way to get also organic stuff. And of course, everything that just grows in the city is more organic than the stuff that comes from the industrial fields, right? So yeah, there's a lot of foraging going on.
I think what you just said, like also like, you know, like bringing people around like a garden, around soil. So now in the child-free space, that oftentimes isn't possible, or maybe it is possible, because I think James and Zoe, you started online, but then also went offline. You had meetings in Berlin. How did that go? And where are you now with that?
Yeah, I really related to what Tammy said about creating a space, and then people started to come. Like both like Tammy and Giselle as well. We kind of instinctually started doing this, and people would like gather around what we were doing. But it was like all online. When we launched the project, Zoe and I used to work together, like blogging and stuff, like back in the day when blogs were a thing. And we'd always just work together creating digital content. So that's what we did. And then the project really blew up during lockdown. So we launched the podcast then as a way of, we couldn't get out and shoot people. So we would speak to people all over the world. And I think that kind of helped us like build momentum as well. Like people really needed community then, and being online was like the only way to access that. But we also needed folks around us. Like that's apparent, like everyone does. Like we need actual people around us who understand us, who can support us. And so we're increasingly getting offline and into the real world. And we started doing meetups in Berlin. And yeah, we also, actually the meetups in Berlin, I hope this is a coincidence, but they really took off since we left Berlin earlier this year. We have a lovely person who came up to us at the last meetup we were at and offered to basically run like a Telegram group to organize meetups. And now there's like hundreds of folks in there, like completely separate to our member community, of people who are meeting up in the different neighborhoods or gathering around like sporting activities that they like. I think a few of them are going to the cinema tonight. So we're like watching from afar with like real FOMO. And we've started kind of trying to replicate that in other places. For a while, I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but for a while, Zoe and I felt like we had to like be in the place to sort of see the community. Not for a reason of control, we just felt like this is our work, it's kind of our job to do this. So we were going around like in the UK, London and Manchester, and hosting meetups there, and then letting folks meet and run their own meetups afterwards. But that's not going to be that sustainable. We're going to get back into Europe very soon and start doing our own meetups because we need community just as much as everyone else does. But we're also experimenting with ways of just letting folks host their own Telegram groups where they are. And so we have people who are meeting up regularly in Hamburg, and things are starting up in like Cologne and the Netherlands. And so we like love to see it because the online space like really helps certain people with certain things. But there are plenty of people who around them, you know, especially like women in their 20s and 30s, when their friends start having kids, like suddenly like their friends kind of disappear. And so for us to be able to do that, to connect people in real life, or rather we're not doing it, for us to be able to be, like Tammy was kind of saying, like introducing people to each other so that they can connect where they are. That's amazing. We're just trying to do more of that and let more people in on doing the work. Because I think that's something we've learned quite recently about community building, is like, you may have kind of started something, but it's not your community, it's not your work, it like belongs to the people. And the more people who are active and engaged and involved in like doing the work, like they want to be able to do that. And that's, for them, that's part of being community as well. So yeah, we're just trying to like spark as much of that as we can.
Yeah, you're doing a good job with that. So
Thank you.
yeah, and just even bringing out the word child-free. I mean, I never really identified with that as much, but there is no other word for it. So then that's it. But also I see sometimes this is the biggest hurdle to even address people and get people into your community, because they don't even like, what, child-free? No, that's not, like, they don't want to be, or don't want to, there's like something about that, you know, which is like sometimes in the way of building that community, which would be. Yeah,
you're right. And like, this is something that we talk about all the time. I mean, we would love to not have to have this project at all. We would love to just it not even be a thing. You know, if you don't have kids, that should just be normal and fine, and it shouldn't be an issue. But that's not the world we live in. And the more we're learning from people, yeah, the word child-free is like very problematic. It's kind of good in some ways and bad in other ways. And the world, what's interesting speaking to people in different countries is like, yeah, where we are in the UK and in the US and stuff, it's kind of like becoming more normalized and acceptable to say, and it can kind of be, maybe it is the best word to express something, but other countries don't really have this language even yet. They don't have like a word equivalent of child-free. No, so
no way to translate it.
No, right?
No way to say it in Hebrew.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
That's what I wanted to ask Tammy next one. Yeah.
Yeah. So like basically the conversation is moving along at different speeds in different places. But what's important for us is creating a space where people feel welcome. And we can't do that with the word child-free. Maybe doesn't really do it, but I think when people come and see our content or listen to it or encounter our community, we try to make it very clear that we're as inclusive as possible. Like we always say, we're the community for anyone who needs it. And whether you consider yourself child-free by choice or circumstance, or childless, or a non-parent, or you're still a step-parent, but you didn't have children of your own, and whoever you are, if you need our community, we are here for you. And we try to represent there like a difference between kind of other online child-free spaces where there could be a lot of gatekeeping, a lot of quibbling in the comments over like, well, that's not really child-free, well, you shouldn't be here, and that kind of thing. It's like, no, we don't need that. Like, the world has kind of put us on the outside and othered us already. We're not about to do that to other people. So yeah, I think the language is evolving. We'll be part of that. Obviously, like, we pretty heavily branded ourselves. For us, it works, and we're defining child-free in kind of like the most open, inclusive way possible. And I think that's a big part of, people see that, and that draws kind of, not the right people, but it draws people into the community who also just want to support each other as well.
Yeah, and having a word for it, I think, is important, and child-free is cool. You making it cool. And but Tami, exactly. So Tami, how it is in Israel, because of course, I don't know what is
I should say that I never.
Most you can say in Hebrew.
Sorry?
What is the closest word in Hebrew to something?
Yeah, there is a word that was invented for this community of people that doesn't necessarily define itself as a community, but there is one person in Israel, I think it's her copywriting, but I'm not sure. Orna Donat, I think you heard about it, her, or talked with her, but I connect this title to her because she's the one who started talking about it out loud, making an issue out of it, something to talk about in Israel, or the first one I heard about. And until that moment, I knew there's something interesting about the fact that I don't have kids, but it wasn't my issue. I had a busy life. I had enough issues to speak about, and enough work to do in the house, and the people that were actually living with me. It's like so much is happening all the time. And we also were we were opening our house. Part of the work was to show our life to people, so people would come on tours, and on those tours people would almost always ask, so is this a community without kids? Or so you should not have kids to have a community, right? That's what you're saying. I'm like, it's not what I'm saying. It just happened that our community is like that. But community, we are 5 people living, and we call ourselves many times an alternative family. This is our family. We're different ages. Each one came in his, like kids come to the family at some point. So people appear and decide to stay and live with me, which is complete surprise to me. But it was very practical. It was very enjoyable. It was an amazing, I never thought about it. It just happened. And then I was like, oh, let's experiment. This is why I like that you say it's a living experiment. We can always, it's not a family. So I can always say, that doesn't work, and go on. So anyway, Orna Donat is calling it, or people call it now in Israel, al-horut, which is non-parent. I'm non-parenting, or it really doesn't translate very well in both directions. But that's how people chose it. It's only in recent years that the conversation started. And then I realized there's a conversation also about that. It's like every piece of my life can be part of a conversation, because it's all not normal. And every time I remember, I don't have kids, that's another thing, right? Because it's just not, for me, it's fine. Like part of what was built for me in this community is a bubble. It's a place where I'm normal. I think this is what also James is doing. It's like, let's build a place where everybody that feels not normal somewhere for social, historical reasons, like because of the story that our people tell, let's create a bubble where we tell a different story, and it's normal to this and this and that, and also not having kids. And it's normal to have a kid also. It's like,
Right. Both. Yeah. And so Giselle, maybe you want to tell us, because you have built a community, like, for example, the Giving Garden, which started out as a beautiful, and is always and has been like a beautiful idea. But what did you experience in terms of like, how do you build a community, and what is like something that you should look out for, to make this successful?
So much to say on this topic. Anyone who's been in yeah, I'm of the belief that, we all have to do our internal work. There's so much that we have to work out in ourselves first and foremost to be able to show up in any relationship, right? So, but it's amplified in community. The things that you are carrying forward, it's amplified. And so I definitely experienced that, not only at the Giving Garden, pretty much every community, even my family community, right? So, but what I will say, because I don't want to name names and get into story, it's interesting that the triggers that happen, like, for instance, power play. Like, I'll just speak to that, like, because when I started the Giving Garden, I was at the forefront of leading it. I had all these ideas, and I had people backing me, and it was like, yeah, go for it, do it. And then it was interesting, in years in the making, as the community was growing and gaining popularity. I mean, we had thousands of people come through at some point. We were hosting, I was meeting people who had different offerings, and I would say, hey, I have this space, come, lead something. And it really, actually, there was a point where, I mean, almost every other weekend we had different offerings. So we had lots of people coming through. And then in the midst of that, there weren't specific agreements to begin with. I think, that's really important, is not only to start with agreements, but then to keep revisiting agreements and reminding people of agreements. And so I think I wasn't definitely well schooled, and I hadn't learned that I should have, said, hey, let's sit down again. Let's talk about the initial vision and what's happened since. And so there was a lot of power play that started to show up, and a lot of triggers and conflict, and it was really rough for a period there. I mean, it's all been reconciled now with all the members, and it's beautiful, and I'm so grateful that we got through it. But it was really challenging, and we didn't know how to get through it, And actually, I want to bring up, I don't know if you know Starhawk. She's so you know her. She's in a permaculture. I was also living in a permaculture farm, Tammy, and so I love permaculture, and permaculture really has been instrumental in how I view community and how I live my life, actually. But this book, it's called The Empowerment Manual, and she goes really in depth of the conflict that shows up in community, and that there's all these exercises that you have to do together in community. And so I wish I had had this resource then, but now I do. And now moving forward, I know that I can utilize this resource of, again, coming back to agreements, because people forget the agreements they make. And so it's really important to remind people of, like, hey, we made these agreements and let's revisit them. And sometimes you have to talk ad nauseum about them. Sometimes you're just like, oh, this seems basic, but for some people, they really need to hear it again. And people want to be heard. That's the other thing. I think for sure for me, because I was leading, I didn't actually want to lead. It was really interesting. I wanted it to be a group of us. I never wanted to be the leader of it. And I felt like people put me as the leader. They were like, oh, good, you're handling this. Great, you're at the helm. And then it was interesting because it kind of backfired on me, because there were definitely some energies that were like, oh, well, you think you're in charge? And so So, and I don't even know how group consensus, I mean, even that is, I don't know, next to impossible, I feel, because to get everyone on board and in agreement is also really challenging. There's lots of lessons to learn, and I'm still in the growth and then in the learning, like Tammy. I'm constantly learning, and I want to be better. I want to be more impeccable with my words and my actions, and I try to do that as best as I can to, you know, acknowledge people and hear people, and but also like be boundaried, you know. So that's another thing I learned is, you know, boundaries are really important, and because there were a lot of times my boundaries were you know, disregarded, or I didn't stand up for myself in so many moments. So there's a lot of growth and learning in community, that is for sure.
Well, I think because that's what I hear a lot, not just from child-free people, but there is this notion of when I'm older, I'm going to buy a piece of land and I'm going to live there with my best friends, and we're all going to have such a great time. And everybody pictures something like Golden Girls or something like this. And then the reality, or like, you know, or I think, James, you might be also driving, like if you with Hannah in the Portugal, you know, it's like also the farm, or kind of like a piece of land, and there's like several people. And I think it just like needs like a plan on how to do that, especially what you just said, Giselle, you know, having rules, revisiting the rules, even though it sounds like totally what you don't want to do, but that in the end is what you have to do to keep it healthy and fun. Boundaries, rules, boundaries. Would there be one more thing that you would say that, you know, yeah, that's really important?
I mean, fun, play, make it fun. Like, you know, it gets too serious sometimes. And so, yeah, I think, you know, actually, and I love actually this book because Starhawk has all these exercises.
Show it again. What is the book?
Called the Empowerment Manual. And so, I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, yeah.
By Starhawk. And so she's got all these exercises in there, so that as a community, you can do these exercises that kind of like are playing out the potential for conflict even before it happens. Like, that's something that I feel moving forward, I want to practice more of, you know, and they say this even in relationships with your partner, right? Like, hey, talk about things when you're in a good place, you know, talk about those things that you're challenged about, you know, with your partner when you're in a happy place. And so I think the same applies for when you're in community, you know, like, okay, conflict may or may not show up. It probably will, but you know, in this moment, let's do these exercises and let's role play, you know, through what conflict might look like, how we might respond, because we're all learning, you know, and we all have our different traumas that we carry from our relationships with our families, and, you know, all the trauma from romantic relationships or whatever it is, and we're bringing that into the community. So I think, you know, doing these exercises are critical. And I know moving forward, whatever community I'm building next, and it's interesting that you say about, I have several friends that have bought land and they're like, okay, Giselle, we're going to create community. And I'm kind of like, all right, well, let's see, you know, let's see how serious everyone is about this. And I do visualize myself, I'm currently not in community, and I do visualize myself being back in community again, living, and I want to bring all these tools and resources with me to make it better.
Beautiful, beautiful. How would you, maybe also James has an idea, or Tommy, how would you choose? I think it's also really important, who do you choose to be in community with? Is there any thoughts on how do you choose? Is there something like that?
I think it goes back to what I said, or James also, that you just created. And then also what Giselle said, when you create it, first of all, you have to have resources. And being child-free is a resource, because it means that we have time and we can grow. Instead of growing our own private kids, we grow a space or a community, or we learn and teach. Like there's a certain point in life where if we are like into development, there's a point of time that it's time to give out, like we're full, and then it's not like full end of the learning, but full enough to start giving out what I learned. And I don't have my own kids. And actually it's an advantage, because then people who are interested in what I have to give are coming. And so I create a space that is holding the values and the rules that are my rules. And it's not my rules, it's, to me, in my mind, it's natural rules. So what Giselle said before, like about the soil and having food together, it's a basic rule. And it's not something we need to discuss or decide upon. People need food, and people feel good when they are growing plants and working with soil. And there's a lot of things you can do around it, or working with natural materials instead of chemical materials. So it's an ecological house. So I know right now I'm also not in a physical community. We're in a transition, but I picture we all together, like these 5 people and more people that are interested in this future when we are going to live together. But those people I didn't choose them. I made an ecological space, and people who are interested in that came. And some of them are not living with me or never lived with me or with us, but they come through the space and they learn and they take it. And I'm shocked and not shocked that the world is not still full of communities, that people are so fearful of it. Just try, live with other people. It's better for everybody, at least for some time of your day or your life, or not all the time. Like people think that it's 1-0, right? It's either I'm alone, my privacy, my everything is my own rules, or it's like I'm with a lot of people all the time and nothing is under my control. And there's so many gradients. Like just start opening to this option of not being, like everybody says being alone is not good. It's also a basic rule. It's not something that we need to make a research. People are not good when it's not good for people to be alone. A research said no. It's like everybody knows that. I love being alone some of the time, and I am also when people were around me. I was alone when I wanted to.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, and I really like resonate with some of what Tammy said there. Even though we're in very different spaces doing different things. Like we created a space, and we were very clear on our values and embodied those values, and then people who wanted to come check it out came and checked it out. But like when we first started the private member community, we talked a lot about who should be allowed in and who should not be allowed in, because it felt important to have a safe space. And we especially wanted a place where women and people with uteruses could come and talk and not run into trolls or any like of the wrong kind of attention and stuff like that. And we talked for the longest time about not letting men into the community, because the project came out of Zoe shooting child-free women, and like for better or worse, reproductive rights and reproductive responsibility has traditionally fallen to women, and so it felt like a woman's issue. But I'm glad we didn't end up making those kinds of rules about who could or could not be in the community, partly because I can be part of it and still help run it, but also because it's important. I think it's important for this not to be purely a woman's issue, because we've seen what happens when all reproductive responsibility and rights are left with women. Then they can be legislated away, they can be taken away by men who largely can be unaffected by it. And and the sort of men who would do that only listen to other men. So we have like a little project inside in our community with the handful of men who are in there, talking about how we can be more vocal and visible about this and be more kind of actively involved in the community. But it all comes from a similar thing that Tammy talked about. It's not important like who you are. It's important that you basically like agree with what we see as a few basic fundamental things about being respectful of people and their choices, and speaking with compassion and being open and listening. You know, we have community guidelines, and it's anyone who shows up needs to kind of respect those and live by those. And like Giselle said, like sometimes you have to remind people and revisit those and talk about what they are. Sorry, I ran out of steam there, but yeah, I really liked a lot of what Tammy said just then.
But you're also bringing up like a really important point, and that is like child-free men, which are often overlooked because it seems to be just a woman's issue. And it is because women get more, let's say, you know, more judgment for it. But I think what I always, why I find this topic really important is also because it is a different life path. And if we just ignore that, it doesn't serve us, because it just doesn't, right? And that includes men too. So I don't know what your experience is as that, James, or maybe even Michael can, like, I don't know if Michael has an experience as a child-free man. If you even know, because you I know guys think like, well, I can still have a kid, like, you know, like maybe when I'm like 70. Maybe there is that story too, right? That it's like you're never really that until, I don't know, when you're 80, maybe.
I'll say something quick on this. I kind of thought I'd have kids, but I never created I never focused on it or created it in my life. I somehow, and now here I am, you know, and, but when I think about children in my life, it always goes to community. And so I don't really need my own kids. I just like being around kids, and I can be around kids. And I think that's more important to me than anything, just being a role model and learning from kids. And so that's all. That's more important to me than having my own kids.
James is nodding.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I feel the same. Like I'm living with family here, living with my 5-year-old nephew, and it's great to be involved in kids' lives. And likewise, I never prioritized it or really thought about it. I think Zoe and I didn't really think about whether we'd have children or not, like right up to the point where we started this project together. We were like, oh yeah, I guess we are child-free. But yeah, I think I mean, you're absolutely right, in that it's we kind of, it's different for us. We do not face the same challenges or stigma or judgment. We can face, like we've heard from men in different countries, and it can be harder in different countries. There are different expectations, but it's always worse for the women wherever you are. And I think like for a while I kind of mistakenly thought that I didn't want to be like the guy eating up the space in the room. Like even now, I don't want to take us too far down this path. But I think it's important for it not to just be seen as a woman's issue or a woman's problem, and that men are part of this community. And I think we can lend some vocal support and really help things change. But yeah, just the idea of still being in community, like involving children. I think Tammy talked about this. Like we are, like Zoe and I are about to set off on travels, and we will be visiting Hannah, who you spoke to earlier this week, at the community she's at, and we're going to check out different ways of communal living. And in our head, when we kind of imagine that, even like our naive dream, like Golden Girls scenario of it, like there are different generations there. There are still kids there. Like that's a full, complete community, and we're not, as we like always say, like when we talk about being child-free, we are not. So, some people don't like children. That's fine. That's also fine. But we are not talking about like, we're not antinatalists. We don't believe that no one should have children. We don't want to be shielded away and siloed off from children. Like I think intergenerational living is like what the world needs more of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something I've spent a lot of time in Israel. I love the kibbutz way of raising children. It's like the community raises the children. I was a little preoccupied for part of this. I don't know, Tammy, if you spoke about that, but
I didn't mention the kibbutz, although when I think Giselle said something about we all have our traumas about communal living. So Israelis have trauma from people who grew up in the kibbutzim. As much as it looks very romantic from the outside, they grow up thinking they will never live in a community. And also we get people that come to City Tree, oh, so it's like a kibbutz. It's like, not really, but you could say it is. On some level it is, yes, of course. And if there was a kid here, we would raise it together. But for many years in most of the kibbutzim, the kids are not raised together by the community anymore. It's very much privatized, and people live just the city way of life in a very natural, with a lot of land place. And never mind. It's another subject. We're really missing good models for communities. And in Israel, the kibbutzim do not work as an inspiration right now, unfortunately, because there were could have been and were at the beginning a source of inspiration for the whole world, obviously.
Right. The philosophy is good. The concept is beautiful.
Absolutely.
I was looking for like an older woman. I thought for the film, for sure there's an Israeli older woman that then lives in a kibbutz, and then she has like this community that she's establishing there for herself. And that was like, no, doesn't exist. Like really, I
don't know anybody like that.
I couldn't find anybody. And I just spoke to Ruby Warrington, who spoke to Orna Donat lately about her project, and she's portraying child-free women that are older in Israel, seeing whether they then establish this family or alternative family. And she found out that they don't. They stay by themselves because they kind of like also don't like to have that. That's why they didn't have a family. That's why they don't want to have it later on either. So, but they're fine.
I'm not sure that's why. I'm not sure. I would doubt that. Although that I'm sure they tell this story. It's like people tell me why community is not for them. They tell me, listen, it's not for me, and they explain it. And it also is not for me. And it's not that it's not for me. I grew up in a world that was all about privacy, because privacy works well for the economy. That's it. And many people are afraid of community because they're afraid to lose their financial security. It's like if you go to a community, like in the kibbutz, for example, everybody knows the stories about people who gave so much to the kibbutz, and when it was time to leave, they had nothing compared to the city guy who had everything at the age of 40, which is not necessarily always the truth, not at all. But this is the story that was told to us, that if you run the normal way of life, you have much more security, and security means you have money in the bank. And so people are very fearful. I think this is one of the points. Like also, when you have kids, it's much harder to go into when I talked about resources before, it's not only time resource. It's like, I don't have kids that I need to worry about what they will get in their bank account. So I have money. If I have it, I invest it in the community. It's not a problem for me. It's not like I don't, oh, wow, I'll invest it here so my kids will not have anything. I don't have this fear. And so many people have big houses and a lot of money, and they keep it for the kids. There's so much resources out there that are not going back to the soil and not going back to human beings and health and all that. And that's the system. It's not a personal story.
I have a question which touches on this whole issue, is that maybe the wording is flawed. Like nobody would have any issue. Tammy, you're bringing up these people have baggage maybe around the word community, but nobody would have any issue maybe around the word connection, deep connection, circles of connection.
Yeah.
Frankie Lee, who Andrea has spent time with, who died recently, who spent her whole life trying to build various communities, and maybe it's just about connection, and deep connection, and that's, and because nobody's going to dispute that. Nobody's going to have an issue or baggage, I think, around living in connection, and so, I mean, not to say the word community doesn't work.
No, but the question is, will they go to live together? It doesn't matter how you call it. Like, you can talk about connection. You can even say community. If it's an online community, it's fine. That's not a problem.
It's not
for most
necessarily
people.
about living together. It's just about creating deep connections, right?
Well, for me, it is, because that's the story that I'm bringing here. And of course, connection and all those values can live also outside of, but I think the living together concept, but I think it's central to me. This is central to our future. Like, this is, in my view, central for us to start sharing our resources, because living in a community is sharing resources. There's so much resources out there. We need to start sharing them.
Absolutely. But what you said is, like, what is right is that there's no role models, or very few. So what would you like, just like as an ending question, and then also we can talk about whatever hasn't been said yet. What is it that you would love to find somewhere in this world? What would be your dream community that you hope you stumble upon or you hope to create? Is there something like that?
That's a great question.
Giselle is nodding.
I fantasize all the time, actually, about this dream community, because, like I mentioned earlier, I have these friends that have bought land. I have access to land in my ancestral land in Montenegro. I'm Albanian from Montenegro, and so I'm always thinking about, especially as I'm getting older, where do I want to be, in the last years of my life, and who do I want to be with? And I want to be in community. I don't want to be alone. And so I am aspiring and moving towards that, and just visualizing, yes, having access to nature and having, community projects that we're doing together. I definitely see this vision of having things that we're working on. I do know that we all need to have our own little homes. I've lived with people together. I've realized, I'm like, oh, it's nice to have space, right? And to have that privacy and alone time, and to not worry about, like, hey, someone hasn't washed the dishes or whatever. You have your space, and then you have a shared space, and then you have things that you work on together as a community. And I also want to live with children. I love being around children, and I've been a teacher before, and I see myself as being a teacher again in a next community I end up in, and offering that to the community, and having, like you said, Tammy, like sharing the resources. I see the community of my dreams being people of all different, backgrounds and, different skill sets. And so everyone's bringing the best of what they have to offer into the community. That's my dream community, is like, bring it. Like, I would love to work and teach the kids, which I know parents are like, great, take care of my kids, go teach them. And there's other people who have other things to offer. And so in my mind, that's my dream community, is that everyone that's showing up has a skill set that they want to offer to the community, that they're like, hey, this is what I have. I'm going to bring it. And we pull those resources, that's it. That's my dream community.
That's beautiful. Love that. How about James?
Yeah, I mean that sounds great. I mean, we've heard from people in our community who've like Barbara, who's originally from New York. She was on the podcast. She's always like had as she ages, she's always kept like younger friends and friends with families and stuff. And she signed up for she now lives in the Netherlands. Like she signed up for basically a kind of room or a unit in like an intergenerational housing complex, which sounds pretty cool. Like, you know, as she ages, she'll have the support of younger folks and she can also teach them and share her experience and stuff. Um, that sounds pretty great in the short term. When I get older, like something like that, or living on the land as well, that version of that sounds good. But and beyond that, like I really like resonated with what Tammy was saying about kind of this kind of like privacy concern with independence. There's a good book called Without Children by Peggy O'Donnell Heffington, which is it's supposed to be. It started off being the story of the history of being child free, but then basically kind of became like a history of how we used to, not too long ago, we used to actually live in community all together. And when they said it took a village to raise a child, like a village would raise a child, basically. And families and people who weren't family and child-free people were all kind of involved in like cultivating the land, invested in their community, and involved in like raising the next generation. And I think that like it's true that capitalism is trying to keep us all siloed, trying to keep us disconnected. And I think parents are feeling that just as much as non-parents. So yeah, in the future, this is a very vague, like long-term dream, but for like everyone to feel connected to everyone else and just be, you know, really like invested in raising the community together. That's my dream.
Beautiful. Love that.
It's beautiful. And I don't think I have much to add to that because that's the dream. It's like, what's the chance that I'll say my dream now and it will be very different than Giselle's or James or anybody else's? So I have to, maybe I'll dream about a system that makes that the natural way. Yeah, a system that tells a different story about what it means to be a human on Earth. And then in this new system, people will still be able, it will be completely normal to choose to be in your own place if you want. It's like we said about not having our kids, is just opening the option as being a legitimate option. But most people probably will choose to be in groups. And then there could be all kinds of groups, but all of them will listen to the rules of nature. It's like food will go back to the soil because this is how it works. So it will be like wasteless, right? Like nature is wasteless. So community needs to be wasteless. It's like a little bit the resources. Every resource, every gift finds the hands that take it. And in case of food, the mouth that will eat it, right? That's nature. And kids will have many different ages, people around them. I think it's the natural way. And so I think that the questions to ask are really what is the natural way to live? And we all know that the answers, it's just that people from when I was a young age, whenever people say that, oh, it's so naive, people used to live there like that and they didn't like it, so they stopped. It's kind of an awkward way to tell the story of why we're not in a community anymore. And so I think discovering the history, it's like discovering the history of women, discovering the history of community, what happened around the world, what made us leave the land and live in cities. I'm all about cities, but as I said before, my fantasy is that people will not so much be about, will find the land, but will where they are. If they're on a land, great. But if they are in the city, they will have a system that will enable them to be with community and to be with the soil in the city. And I have all kinds of ideas about how the soil comes back to the city, but that's another conversation.
Andrea, do we have time for a question from me?
Sure.
Giselle brought up a really important point, and it resonated for me because I've pretty much spent my life in various ways, mostly as a filmmaker, building community. I'd say more than anything, everything I do around filmmaking is some version of community building. And Giselle brought up the ego, and and how and so much I've read about community builders facing these issues that Giselle brought up. And maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear James and Tammy, and even you, Andrea, talk about when you've experienced that tension between having your agenda, having your plan, and being able to put it aside, because and hear what the community, whomever, wants. And it would be great. I don't know if you have a specific story, but stories are running through my head about my personal experience with this. So I'd love to hear from James, Tammy, and Andrea, if possible, because I think for community builders who are watching now or who watch this down the line, that's a big issue. And James, I don't know if you can actually tell a story about a time when you had to let go of something you really had a strong belief in for the good of the community, and if nothing comes to mind specifically as a story, that's fine. But just, we could talk about the issue around ego and letting go. It's tricky. It's hard.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrea.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, this feeling of like letting go is something that we're going through all the time. Like, it doesn't feel like ego, but I guess it is. It's kind of this idea that we're at the center of this project and we need to be responsible for it and run it with the best intentions, but we are trying to let go all the time. And I think like the probably the best example is that when we kind of started our private membership community, like we did that with like kind of two impulses. Like, we wanted a way for people to support us. People were coming to us and saying like, how can I support the project? And I need community. They were saying those two things. And we were like, well, we can sell them access to a community, and then, that will take care of it. And it's grown well, but it grows slowly. And I think at first we had wild expectations for the numbers of people who were joined, based on the numbers of people who were following us on social media and everything, and kind of based on this wonky thinking that, well, the two of us are spending nearly all of our time on this project. Therefore, we must get back the equivalent kind of support to continue going like that. And when that didn't happen, when it was kind of slow going at first, that was like a bit of a blow to the ego. But I think what we learned from that is actually just by doing what we do and putting the stories of child-free people out there. People come to us with their stories, they like write them up and we share them on Instagram. That kind of giving that out, that in itself is creating community, and it creates community that's enough for lots of people. So rather than us feeling like, well, we're doing all of that and people can access it for free and publicly, and therefore it's not as valuable as this other community that we have, that was just not true. That we have different spaces for different people with different needs, and they have different levels of investment in all of them. But it's all community. And yeah, we had to learn that. We had to kind of be like, just because we've kind of spent far too long on building this nice fancy website and thinking over and over and over again who should be in the community and who should not, and actually building up this space, this like piece of software for people to live inside of. just because we did all of that, that's not the same as its value. Like, it has that value to some people, but the other work that we do also has value. And I agree with what you were saying, Michael, and like what you do and what Andrea does as well. Just by going out and meeting people and then telling their stories and reflecting it back to folks, yeah, that is community. And I think that's what, when you talk about community, capital C, I think people only think of it one kind of way. But yeah, just telling stories is community. And I think it took us kind of far too long to learn that. And that was we had to let go of that.
Thank you for that answer. That was an honest look into how we are, like exactly what Michael also described, right? How we just like become sometimes when we have an idea and we want the best for it, and then we just like, get consumed by it also before even knowing it. And then you realize it just later. You're like, oh wow. Yeah.
You grow a lot. You grow a lot in that in between, right? You grow when you let go. You're like, whoa, I just grew. I'm a better person. Wow. Tammy, do you have a comment? And maybe, Andrea, maybe anybody who would be watching have any questions? Do you want to open it up?
I don't know. And I also don't want to keep, because I said to everybody, I just said yes right now, but I don't want to keep everybody longer because I said it's an hour. And so, I don't know. I'm not watching right now. I thought you are watching, Michael, the YouTube.
Okay, it's 11:11. It's 11:11. Man, it's like, yeah, we're 11 minutes over, but it's 11:11. Wait, right. Tammy, do you have a quick answer? And then Andrea, if you want to call it, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I guess. I think so. I want everybody, yeah, exactly. Tammy answers, and then everybody can say something, how to reach them.
So there are many things that came to mind, but I guess this living space, demonstrational space that I've been creating for 15 years in like different spaces, but the last one was 10 years in the same apartment, same place, with so many people coming in and so many things are happening and events. And for many years, I thought I will never leave this place. I said, oh, I'll be there. I'll be here until I die, or I'll be here until I'm kicked off, because it was a rented place. It didn't happen. At some point, I started to want that they will kick me off, because after what I said, how can I leave that? But at another point, it was like to just release it and understand that it's over for me, and also embrace the leadership part, because it's hard when it's many times, and Giselle also said something about that. It's hard to decide when is it my time to be part of the group and let the group and the circle wisdom to lead the way, and when it is time to say, yes, I'm taking a decision here. And well, still, what do you say? Of course, there's always a conversation, but there is this place that I know that if I wouldn't have decided it, we would still be in Tel Aviv. But when I took this decision, I was thinking about people I knew very well. Again, it's only 5 people, and I could see how it will work well for everybody, even when they didn't see it. It's a little bit like being a mom, and yeah, it will be better for everybody. And it's only a few months, but I think it is the way. It was a hard decision anyway, and very hard, a crisis. And I'm still processing it.
I got to say something. Tammy probably doesn't even remember this, okay? And I don't know that I've ever told this story to Tammy, but when Tammy started, I was in Israel, and I showed up at her place.
What?
I was yeah, you don't even remember.
This is why at the beginning you said Tammy. I'm like, what does he mean?
Tammy? I stayed at your place like 15 years ago when you first started this, and you let me sleep there, and you had cats all over the place, and I'm super allergic to cats. Tammy, you don't even know this. This is hilarious. So Tammy had just started this community, capital C and small c, both, okay, which is perfect. And yeah. And Tammy said, "Come on in," and made dinner, made food. You don't remember. And then had me sleep in this. I mean, this place was like, I don't know what it was, Tammy, at the time. It barely existed. And that's it. We gotta hang up. But and there were cats all over the place. And I'm allergic
It's not my
to
cats. Don't call, now everybody thinks, oh, she doesn't have kids. She's the cat lady.
She's
It
the cat
wasn't-
lady.
It was two cats. It wasn't my cats. It's a long story.
No, I
Never
know
mind.
it wasn't Tammy's cats. It was like city cats, and Tammy like had open windows with all these cats coming
Exactly.
in.
We don't have air condition. No, it was only
It was
two
great. It was a
cats.
great night.
Anyway,
it was a great night.
We have to
and-
turn
and
off
I
the
didn't mind
mic
the
and then
cats.
continue. Like after the live, Michael, we need to talk.
I know.
Yeah, you
I
two
know,
need to
don't
talk.
Remember this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm good. Take over.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming on. Thanks, Giselle. Thanks, James. Thanks, Tommy. Also, thank you, Michael. Maybe, do you want to quickly let us know how we can get in touch with you? Is there something that you offer, Giselle, James, Tommy? I know James does. How can we join your community, James?
Yeah, so if you go to wearechildfree.com, there you'll find hundreds of stories from child-free people. You'll find links to our socials. You can sign up for our newsletter. So we'll send you a story from a different child-free person every week. And yeah, if you'd like to support, that's also where you'd find that private member community I talked about. Thank you.
Beautiful. Which is very worth it. So just like even signing up for the newsletter, get a membership. It's amazing. So and Giselle.
So I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. So I currently am working with spiritual community. So after I left the Giving Garden and had my own personal stuff that I was navigating, I went into a deep spiritual path as a moon dancer and a pipe carrier. And I've been leading sweat lodges and fire circles. So that's the community that I'm building right now. And you can, find me through my website, gisellegenesee.com, or at Spiral Circle Healing on Instagram. But that's the short story.
Beautiful. I love that. Tommy, is there something?
So my work is especially relevant to Israelis because it's all in Hebrew, and I kind of insist on that. I don't try. I'm all about locality. So for the Hebrew speakers that might be listening or in the future will see this, just look for Etz Ba'ir, City Tree. You'll find me we have a website, Facebook, and we are also on Patreon. So we do have a little circle of, we call them the huggers of the tree. And so this is the people who give us money every month. And right now it's our only way of supporting, and we don't need a lot right now because anyway, yes. So that's another place where you can find us.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you.
Quickly,
Thank you
we have
all for coming.
Andrea, we have a lovely comment from somebody watching, just saying that one of the reasons why she loves Topanga Canyon is because how the community has helped her raise her 2 children.
Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, that's a community. So let us know in the comments for everybody watching the replay. Let us know in the comments, what is your dream community? What is it that you picture that you would love to create? We would really love to know that. And to all of you, thank you very much. James, Giselle, Tommy, Michael.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
For creating
very
this
much.
community.
Yes, we'll all stay in touch. Bye. Thank you very much for your time.
Sorry we went over time. Sorry, my fault. Goodbye.